Hey guys, tonight we are wandering into the frosty heart of Victorian London, where the streets turn into ice rinks nobody asked for. Imagine cobblestones slick with frozen rain, horses snorting steam into the night air, and you trying not to break your ankle on the way to buy bread that tastes suspiciously like sawdust. The poor slip and shiver, clutching their coats tighter, while the wealthy glide past in carriages sealed tight, the windows fogged from their private warmth. You probably wouldn't last a single evening here, let's be honest. Even your phone battery gives up faster in the cold. So what chance do you really stand without central heating? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. It makes me oddly happy to know someone is drifting to sleep in Berlin or Kansas, or maybe hiding under a blanket at 3 in the morning in Melbourne, pretending they'll just watch one more video. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out onto Whitechapel Road, and the air bites your nose so sharply you half expect it to fall off. Ice clings to the gutters, where water froze days ago and never left. Your breath comes out in clouds, little ghosts of your lungs, while a costermonger drags his barrow through snow that crunches like broken glass. The wheels refuse to move, and he curses under his breath, though not too loudly, because swearing at your vegetables doesn't exactly help them sell faster. A woman with a baby tucked in her shawl stumbles past you, her shoes worn so thin you can practically hear the cobblestones sighing under them. Meanwhile, a lacquered carriage rattles by, its iron-rimmed wheels cutting tracks through the slush. Inside, velvet curtains are drawn tight, and maybe there's a coal heater glowing warmly beneath a gentleman's polished boots. He pretends not to notice the ragged figures outside, the way you sometimes pretend not to see your neighbor when you're both taking out the trash. That same polite invisibility, but with frostbite as the background music. Historians still debate how effective those carriage heaters actually were. Some claim they were lifesavers. Others say they barely warmed your toes. But let's be honest, if you had velvet curtains and a roof over your head, even lukewarm toes were a luxury. Down here on the street, your fingers are stiff, your nose drips like an uninvited guest, and every step feels like balancing on greased marbles. You pause to watch a crossing. Sweeper child barely taller than the broom he drags. He scrapes snow and slush aside so people can cross without sinking ankle deep. The irony? He's barefoot, standing in the very filth he clears. A human snowplow, unpaid and uncared for. The rich toss him a copper, not out of kindness, but because nobody wants to soil their boots. Think about that next time you grumble at the guy who salts your modern driveway. The lamps lining the street burn dim, halos of light flickering through fog. They make everything look softer, dreamlike, as if London's filth can be painted over by gaslight. You hear vendors calling, the clop of hooves, the sharp crack of someone falling on ice, followed by a muttered curse. Even the soundscape is uneven, laughter spilling from a tavern where people cram together for warmth, while outside, silence clings to the poor huddled at doorways. And then there's you, stuck between these two worlds, your breath fogging up the scene. It feels unfair, doesn't it? The rich cocooned in rolling rooms with wheels, and the poor skating unwillingly on nature's cruel invention of the ice patch. Yet both groups are bound by the same frozen city, just like you and your neighbor are both bound by the same Wi-Fi outage, even if one of you owns 3 backup routers. The thing about Victorian winters is that survival wasn't dramatic, it was daily. Every step was a risk. Every night, another test of whether you had coal, bread, or a blanket thick enough. The rich had their discomforts, 2 frozen pipes in their mansions, perhaps, but misery is relative. When you're wrapped in fox fur, cold becomes a mild inconvenience. When you're wrapped in damp rags, cold becomes a death sentence. And as you walk on, the night stretches long and icy, the streets whispering of lives that slip by unseen. The cold doesn't discriminate, but society does. And that makes all the difference. You leave the icy street behind and step inside a narrow house, ducking beneath a sagging lintel. The shift is instant outside. The cold slaps your face raw, but in here, the air is thick with smoke, the kind that clings to your clothes and your lungs until you taste soot with every breath. The fireplace glows faintly, more ember than flame, and around it a family is pressed close, knees knocking, shoulders overlapping. There's no personal space, unless you count the gap between fingers where the draft sneaks in. You shuffle a little closer, because warmth, no matter how faint, is addictive. The children sit cross-legged on the floor, their toes stretched toward the faint heat. Little white crescents of nails blackened with dirt. Their mother fans the fire with a broken bellows that wheezes like it has consumption itself. A kettle rattles on the hob, releasing not steam but a sound like a faint cough, as if protesting the lack of coal. The father taps the side of the grate with an iron poker, trying to coax flames from the ashes. The smoke curls upward and fills the low ceiling, stinging your eyes until they water. It's like camping indoors, but without the joy, the marshmallows, or the promise of going home tomorrow. Now contrast this with the townhouse across the street. Behind its polished brass knocker and thick oak door, servants unload a fresh delivery of coal. They carry it in neat scuttles, black dust marking their collars but never touching the silk carpets above stairs. In the drawing room, velvet curtains shut out the chill. A lady reclines on a chaise longue, her slippered feet dangling near a crackling fire that burns brightly enough to roast an entire ox, though tonight it's merely illuminating the embroidery in her lap. She sighs and complains of the draught, despite 3 layers of drapery between her and the street. That draught, by the way, would feel like tropical breeze compared to the icy gasp in the poor man's house. Historians still debate how much warmth those heavy Victorian drapes actually kept in. Some argue they were purely decorative, a symbol of wealth more than practical insulation. Others say they did trap heat effectively, turning parlors into little hotboxes. Either way, you wouldn't mind a velvet curtain or 2 right now, even if only to block the sight of the smoke filling your borrowed lungs. You rub your hands together, trying to summon warmth from friction. In the corner, a child sneezes, the sound sharp and hollow. Illness spreads easily in these cramped quarters, the fire too weak to kill damp, the air too dense to breathe clean. A neighbor thumps on the wall, maybe in rhythm with his own cough. The poor are united not by solidarity, but by smoke leaking through thin partitions. Think of it as the 19th century version of second-hand vape, except nobody asked for the flavor of coal dust. In wealthier homes, they had coal deliveries timed like clockwork. A ton of coal might arrive in neat sacks, poured into underground cellars through iron grates. Horses clopped away, and the family inside barely noticed. The fire upstairs never went out. Flames fed constantly like a spoiled pet that only demanded fuel and never affection. You would sit in a wingback chair, sip tea so hot it steamed up your spectacles, and maybe complain about the servant stoking the fire too vigorously. Imagine that. The problem isn't whether the fire exists, but whether it's arranged aesthetically. Meanwhile, in the poorer district, families shared rooms not because they liked each other's company, but because body heat was cheaper than coal. 2, 3, sometimes 5 people slept in one bed, stacked like spoons in a drawer. If you've ever had a sibling kick you in the shins during sleep, multiply that by Victorian hunger, damp sheets, and the occasional rat scurrying over your feet. It was less family bonding and more group survival exercise. The walls themselves offered little comfort. Bricks were porous, mortar cracked, wind rattled the shutters. You feel the cold pressing in like an unwanted guest, nosy and relentless. Candles sputter from the draught, shadows dance across peeling plaster. Every sound, the whistle of wind through a crack, the hiss of smoke curling the wrong way up the chimney, minds you that winter owns this house, not its tenants. Yet, for the wealthy, interiors were showcases. Carpets muffled the echo of footsteps, portraits watched from gilded frames, and the firelight played across crystal decanters. Guests gathered to gossip, sipping sherry while flames popped and hissed with satisfaction. And if smoke filled the room, well, that meant the servants hadn't swept the chimney properly, and someone's wages were about to suffer. For the rich, smoke was an inconvenience. For the poor, smoke was the room. A curious fact. Many Victorian households, even the better-off ones, hung thick tapestries on walls, not only for decoration, but to insulate against damp. They called them arrows in older houses, a tradition that lingered. In contrast, the poor sometimes stuffed rags into cracks or pasted newspapers onto walls for insulation. Imagine sleeping under tomorrow's headlines, except you're not sleeping because the cold still seeps through. As you sit here, your eyes burn from the smoke and your throat scratches. You realize warmth has a price, and the poor pay it with their lungs. The rich pay it with money, and money, as usual, buys the easier bargain. You lean back, listening to the fire sigh in exhaustion. A child coughs again, the mother murmurs comfort, and the father pokes one last time before giving up. Embers glow faintly, shadows flicker, and the cold seeps back in. You shiver, tugging your coat tighter, and wonder how many nights a body can endure this before it breaks. Meanwhile, across the street, the lady with the velvet curtains rings for more tea. Her slippers warm, her sighs dramatic. She calls the room chilly, though her parlor is hotter than a July subway car. Comfort breeds new discomforts, and survival feels like luxury from the other side of the glass. And so the night deepens. The city breathes smoke, and you caught between these two worlds feel the divide in every breath. The poor choke on their own fire, the rich bask in theirs, and the cold lingers just beyond the curtains, waiting for its chance to creep in. Your stomach growls the moment you step away from that smoky hearth, as if the air itself has reminded you what's missing. Out in the narrow alley, you catch the scent of something simmering, faint, watery, and more hopeful than filling. A poor family huddles around a pot, the steam drifting weakly like it's too tired to rise. Inside the pot, scraps, bits of turnip too soft for the market, a heel of bread dissolving into mush. Maybe the bone of a rabbit if someone was lucky or fast enough to grab what the butcher tossed out. The stew is more memory than meal, flavored by imagination as much as by actual ingredients. You dip a spoon, and it's thin, almost clear, yet each sip is swallowed with gratitude. Hunger lowers the bar for culinary standards. Michelin stars. No, here it's a miracle if the soup doesn't taste like smoke and desperation. Across town, a different scene unfolds. A household with velvet curtains has a dining table stretched like a runway, lined with dishes that glisten under candlelight. A roast goose sits center stage, its golden skin crisp and inviting, surrounded by potatoes roasted to perfection. Silver tureens hold steaming soups, rich with cream and herbs that most people on the East End would never smell, let alone taste. Servants glide between chairs, balancing trays of puddings, custards, and syllabub frothy concoction of cream and wine whipped into a cloud. Historians still debate whether syllabub was meant to be eaten with a spoon or drunk from a glass, but either way, it certainly wasn't ladled out in a cracked tin cup by a mother who hoped broth would last until tomorrow. You watch a maid slip through the snow outside, balancing covered dishes to deliver to a neighbor's house. Yes, food delivery existed long before your favorite apricot. The couriers weren't zipping around on scooters. They were trudging through icy slush in thin boots, and no one tipped with 5 stars. At best, you got a nod from a butler. Imagine ordering takeout in the Victorian winter. 1 roast pheasant, extra gravy, delivered by hand. Please. Meanwhile, in the poorer district, the only delivery is hunger itself, showing up uninvited, knocking on ribs with hollow insistence. A boy in patched trousers slurps his portion quickly, eyes darting to the pot for more, though there isn't any. His sister licks the wooden spoon, not for taste, but for the illusion of having had seconds. Their father gnaws a bone, trying to extract flavor long since gone, while the mother assures everyone she's already eaten, though her stomach growls louder than the children's. You've heard of intermittent fasting? Victorians called it feeding the kids first. Meanwhile, at the lavish table, the rich complain of too much. A gentleman waves away another slice of pudding, declaring himself quite full, though you suspect he's saving space for brandy later. Plates are cleared, half finished, leftovers destined for pigs or servants. The same bread heel that would be treasure in Whitechapel ends up tossed casually into a bin. Wealth doesn't just change what you eat, it changes what you waste. There's a curious little fact. In some households, the wealthy kept ice houses, storing blocks of frozen river water beneath ground all year. This meant ice cream, even in winter. Imagine biting into a frozen custard while the streets outside echo with the hollow rattle of empty stomachs. Some swore it was indulgence, others said it was madness. You might agree with the latter as your toes freeze in thin boots. Who eats ice in a blizzard? Victorians with too much money, apparently. Back in the East End, hunger creates creativity. Families stretch flour with sawdust, yes. Actual sawdust baked into bread to bulk it up. It fills the belly, though it scratches the throat. You chew and chew, praying for flavor, but tasting only grit. Someone adds a pinch of salt, another throws an onion peel, and suddenly the room is alive with laughter, because even misery tastes better with company. The meal may be bleak, but the conversation warms more than the food. You notice how humor bubbles up, like steam from the pot. Someone jokes that the stew contains meat if you count the rat that fell in last week. Nobody knows if it's true, but everyone chuckles anyway at the wealthy table. Entertainment comes in the form of after-dinner conversation. Sometimes music played on the pianoforte, sometimes recitations of poetry. The food isn't survival, it's performance. Each course parades out like actors on a stage, applauded, then forgotten as the next dish enters. Food here is a language of status. What you serve says more than what you say. You wonder if they taste anything at all, or if it's just theatre for the tongue. As the night deepens, the contrast grows sharper. Poor families scrape the pot clean, the sound of spoons on metal ringing like hollow bells. They wrap the pot away for tomorrow, praying there will be something left to put in it. The wealthy dab their lips with linen napkins, wine staining the cloth, laughter echoing against high ceilings. Both groups are full in their own way, one with food, the other with exhaustion. You sit back, your own stomach uneasy. Part of you longs for the roast goose, the sugared custards, the endless wine. Yet another part knows the taste of shared stew lingers longer in memory, if only because hunger sharpens gratitude. And as the snow falls outside both houses, you realize the real feast tonight belongs to the cold, which eats its way into every wall, every belly, every breath. Regardless of wealth, you curl deeper into that patched wool coat, the scratchy sleeve stiff from years of wear. It doesn't really keep out the cold, but it gives you the feeling, almost like a placebo, that you've got a barrier between your body and the bite of winter. The air sneaks in through seams and holes anyway, sharp as a needle. Somewhere, someone has stitched this coat 5, 6, maybe 10 times before you. Every mend tells a story, though the thread doesn't tell it kindly. It's lumpy, crooked, but stubborn. Like the person who kept repairing it, because throwing it out wasn't an option. Meanwhile, across town, velvet curtains are being pulled aside to reveal racks of imported furs, heavy as gilt. Sable, mink, fox pelts that once belonged to creatures who never asked to spend their afterlife as a winter fashion statement in Mayfair. The wealthy drape them over their shoulders like armor, though honestly, most of them haven't fought anything colder than the walk from their front door to their waiting carriage. They stack silk beneath the furs, silk that rustles when they move, announcing, yes, I can afford fabric that actually gets colder when you wear it. You sit here, teeth knocking faintly, while they fuss about whether the Russian sable makes them look too serious for an evening musicale, one of life's mysteries. Really, how much time the rich can spend debating coats, while the poor spend the same hours just trying to stop their toes from turning blue. And still, you adapt. You tie strips of cloth around your legs, wear 2 mismatched socks on one foot and none on the other. Swap garments among family members like an endless, slightly tragic round of musical chairs. Sometimes, children wear coats made from blankets cut down to size, still smelling faintly of the beds they once warmed. It's practical, if not fashionable. Then again, nobody's asking the frostbitten boy selling matches on the street what's in season this year. Historians still debate how much layering truly mattered, or if it was just the sheer grit of survival that kept people going. After all, peasants in the countryside often wore the same wool tunic year after year, through mud and snow, patched into near oblivion, yet somehow remained alive. Meanwhile, noble women paraded in ermine capes that dragged across filthy streets, soaking up muck. If warmth was the point, they might have chosen practicality. But fashion, then as now, was about being seen, not about staying alive. You can almost laugh, comparing it to today. People still buy puffer jackets the size of small cars, then spend winter indoors at cafes sipping oat lattes. Somewhere in history's long memory, a Victorian labourer in threadbare wool would probably blink in disbelief at someone dropping a month's wages on technical outerwear for walking between subway stops. At least you didn't need branded logos stitched on your coat in 1815. Nobody cared. As long as it didn't fall apart before spring thaw. There were tricks, too. Poor families stuffed straw between layers of cloth, added paper linings, even wore newspapers under their shirts for insulation. London's vendors knew this. Some sold yesterday's broadsheets, not for reading, but for wrapping round your chest. Imagine headlines from the Crimean War crinkling against your ribs, the ink rubbing faintly into your skin, history literally leaving a mark. Today's version might be someone shoving bubble wrap into their hoodie, practical, absurd, and oddly comforting. And yet, the divide never disappeared. For every ragged figure shivering on Blackfriars Bridge, there was a gentleman in his carriage complaining the fur trim on his lap blanket was slightly too itchy. One froze, the other fussed. Same winter, different worlds. Sometimes you think the poor might have had the sturdier armor after all. Those coats, patched to eternity, became like second skins. The wool smelled of smoke, rain, sweat, and survival. It was ugly but honest. The rich, in their polished pelts, were just one careless step away from catching a cold when fashion demanded bare shoulders at a ball. A shawl might save them, but heaven forbid they wear something practical, so you laugh quietly in your coat of 1,000 repairs. The sleeves frayed, but the body intact. Every rip is a reminder you've lasted this long, and that's more than some can say. Maybe the warmth isn't in the cloth at all, but in the stubbornness stitched into every crooked seam. And as the fire across the room smoulders low, smoke curling into the rafters, you pull the coat tighter. The furs and silks may glitter in candlelight, but it's your patched wool that whispers you through the night, promising you'll make it to morning even if your toes disagree. The dawn breaks pale and grey, and you drag yourself out into the streets that crunch under frozen mud. Your breath makes little ghosts in the air, disappearing almost as fast as your energy. Work doesn't stop because the Thames has a crust of ice, or because your fingers don't bend properly anymore. You go because hunger has no patience for excuses. Your job might be hauling coal, stacking bricks, sweeping the endless soot from doorstep tasks that feel cruel in summer and downright absurd in January. Every movement sends a jolt of pain through your bones, but stopping would only invite the cold in deeper. The scarf around your neck stiffens with frost. The wool is more icicle than fabric now. You stamp your feet just to remember they're attached. Meanwhile, across town, someone yawns by their fireplace, not from exhaustion, but from boredom. The coal delivery has already been carried in, the curtains drawn, the hands tucked into gloves lined with fur. Yet somehow, comfort creates its own complaints. What a terribly long winter, they sigh, as if the season personally offended them. You picture them sitting with a book they'll never finish, the fire crackling, a tray of sugared almonds at their side. You'd almost feel sorry for them if your own stomach weren't, chewing itself hollow. The cold has a way of evening things out, though. It spares no one from draughts or dampness. It just chooses favorites when it comes to suffering. You shovel snow until your shoulders ache, but the man inside the townhouse might catch a chill from his carriage ride to the theatre. And then it's the scandal of the season. There's a strange comedy in it, how the poor labour just to keep moving, while the rich pay to be entertained because they have nothing else to do. You work with cracked hands until your skin splits, blood blooming red against the white frost. They, on the other hand, stir in their chairs, grumbling that the pianoforte is slightly out of tune. Same winter, same city. but your shivers don't sound like their size. Historians still debate how much labor truly increased during the bitterest months. Some records show that outdoor workers slowed, their output as sluggish as their stiffened muscles. Others argue necessity sped them up, desperation warming their backs better than any coat. What's certain is that winter had no sympathy. The workhouse doors stayed open, the factories kept worry, the barges still needed unloading. Ice or not, the machine of the city demanded turning. You think of today people working from laptops in pajamas, complaining when the Wi-Fi lags for 10 seconds. You almost laugh. Imagine explaining to a Victorian chimney sweep that the hardest part of winter work in the 21st century is typing with slightly chilly fingers while sipping overpriced coffee. He'd probably hand you his soot-blackened brush and ask if you want to trade. Still, there's rhythm in this endless labor. The steady crunch of boots on frozen cobblestones, the scrape of shovel against ice, the grunt as crates are lifted onto wagons. It's miserable music, but it keeps you alive. The movement generates just enough heat to stave off the numbness creeping in. Stand still too long, and you'll become a statue by sundown. Just another shape for passers-by to step around. Evening comes, and you're still at it. Shoulders drooping, eyes watering from the wind. But the city needs its coal, its bread, its endless parade of goods, and someone has to carry them. You wonder, briefly, if the people warm in their parlors ever think of the bodies out here making sure their tables are full and their fires stay lit. Perhaps they do. Perhaps they don't. The truth is, your aching muscles and their delicate yawns are part of the same winter play. Two acts performed on opposite stages, and as you trudge homeward, hands raw, clothes stiff with frost, you remind yourself, better to keep moving than to sit still. Motion is warmth. Stagnation is surrender. Tomorrow, the cold will still be waiting, sharp as ever, but so will you. Underneath that grey sky, you drag your tired body home, thinking the worst of the day is behind you. But winter has a way of slipping into your bones, even when the work is finished. The cold doesn't clock out. It lingers, waiting for the moment you sit down and let your guard fall. That's when illness creeps in. A cough starts small, just a scratch in your throat. Ignore it long enough and it spreads like frost on glass, thin at first, then cracking everything. You hear it all around you. The rasp of your neighbor who spent the day hauling sacks by the river. The wheeze of a child down the street who spent hours on bare feet, playing in snow that feels like daggers. You wrap yourself tighter in the same blanket that already smells of damp smoke. But warmth doesn't stop the ache behind your eyes or the heaviness in your chest. Winter in London is never just cold, it's a slow gamble with your health. Doctors. Well, yes, technically they exist for you too, but only in the same way expensive opera tickets exist for you. The wealthy call for them the moment a nose runs out of tune. A carriage sent to fetch the gentleman with his leather bag of remedies, some real, some more theatre than science. For you, the cure is usually waiting it out. Or maybe a homemade brew that tastes suspiciously like wet socks. Spiced with hope, picture the rich lounging in bed, velvet curtains drawn. A physician checking their pulse with a solemn nod. They'll prescribe powders or syrups thick enough to glue wallpaper. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, but at least they get the luxury of being fussed over. You, on the other hand, sneeze and keep working, because missing a day's wages is worse than fever itself. There's a bitter comedy in the way illness cuts across classes but gets treated like two different species. A cough in a mansion is a tragedy to be soothed. A cough in the slums is background noise. You're not secure, just tired. You're not dying, you're under the weather. In reality, you're both. Some accounts from the time suggest frostbite and respiratory disease hit the poor hardest, carving through workhouse populations with ease. Others tell a different story, insisting that even the rich, wrapped in fur, couldn't escape pneumonia when winter dug in. The truth probably lies in between. After all, snow doesn't care about bank accounts. But money can buy coal, curtains, and the kind of care that might tilt the odds in your favor. And then there's the advice people swore by, much of it delightful nonsense. Gargling vinegar, swallowing mustard seeds, rubbing goose fat into the skin. You almost laugh, thinking of today's vitamin gummies shaped like cartoon bears. At least goose fat never came in cherry flavor. The wealthy tried bleeding, blistering, and strange imported tonics. You stuck to prayers and maybe a splash of gin, if luck was kind. Honestly, gin probably worked better than half the things in the doctor's kit. Still, winter has a way of humbling everyone. The mighty cough into embroidered handkerchiefs, the poor hack into their sleeves. Both groups squint at the same dim light through frosted panes, wondering if their breath will steady by morning. The difference is whether someone notices, whether someone writes it down, whether someone remembers. And as you listen to the city wheezing like a giant old man, you realize survival isn't just about warmth or food, it's about luck, timing, and whose bed you're coughing in. The same frost that cracks your boots also chills the wealthy when their carriages rattle through icy fog. But they're tucked in afterward, while you keep working until your body forces you down. The night presses in, heavier than the blankets you have. Every cough echoes louder. Every shadow feels closer. And yet, you stay still, breathing slow, hoping your lungs behave until dawn. Winter doesn't negotiate. It just waits. The morning fog sits heavy on the streets, and your stomach reminds you before your feet do its market day. You push into the crowd where breath and frost mix into a single white cloud. The stalls are half frozen, wood slick with ice, canvas awnings stiff like old parchment. For you, this place isn't a cheerful bazaar, but a last-ditch hope. You hunt through baskets of bruised turnips and wilted greens, fingers numb, bargaining with coins so thin they jingle like mockery. Every cabbage leaf looks like treasure when the air itself feels like punishment. Some vendors shout louder than the church bells, their voices hoarse but determined. They huddle in layers of wool, stamping their feet, hoping to sell enough before frostbite sets in. You almost laugh at the irony selling food to survive while starving in the process. You watch a boy dart between legs, scooping up a fallen carrot as if it were gold. Hunger makes every scrap a prize. Now shift your eyes just a few streets over, where the wealthy stroll the same winter air but somehow never touch its edge. Their markets don't smell of damp straw and spoiled fish. No, there's gleam with pyramids of imported oranges, glowing like little suns against the grey city. They sip spiced wine as though warmth could be bottled and sold, and in their baskets are cheeses wrapped in cloth, chocolates carried across the channel, even oysters still nestled in their shells. You'd think the Thames had frozen just to keep their delicacies fresh. You try not to stare too long, but it's impossible not to compare. Your hands juggle a cracked pot of barley, and there's cradle glass bottles of Bordeaux. You bite into a stale crust. They taste slices of candied fruit. Same season, different planets. What makes it more absurd is how both groups complain. The poor curse the high prices of even the shriveled goods, while the rich wrinkle their noses if the oranges have too many spots. Imagine telling a hungry family that your biggest hardship today is a slightly imperfect mandarin. It's almost comedy. If only your stomach weren't laughing hollow. Some writers of the age described these winter markets as both lifelines and traps. For the poor, they kept bellies barely filled, often with food on the edge of rot. For the rich, they became stages of display shopping as performance, wealth paraded through choice. And not everyone agrees on how far that gap stretched. Diaries show wealthy families eating roast pheasant in December, while other accounts insist shortages sometimes tightened even their tables. Perhaps truth hides somewhere between the piles of bruised apples and the crates of imported figs. You picture it in modern terms. Today, people complain when the supermarket runs out of oat milk, as if life cannot continue without a specific nut squeezed into juice. Back then, you'd have been grateful for anything resembling milk, oat, or otherwise. And those fancy subscription meal kits, Victorians would have called that sorcery. Imagine a wooden box arriving at your door with chopped vegetables and spices already measured. Instead of you clawing through frostbitten stalls for an onion that doesn't smell of mildew. But here, in the Victorian chill, food is more than sustenance. It's status, it's survival, it's the line between enduring and collapsing. You hunch your shoulders, clutching your modest purchases close, while the wealthy carry theirs like trophies. Both of you walk away into the same fog, but only one of you wonders if tonight's stew will be thin enough to see through. And as the day fades, you realize the market isn't just a place to buy food, it's where hope and envy trade places. Every bite you bring home is hard-won. Every bite they bring home is simply chosen. Yet in the silence of winter nights, the sound of chewing fills all the rooms of London, rich or poor. Hunger and appetite are just different names for the same drumbeat in the belly. You breathe in slowly. Let it out. The cold presses against your lungs, but your ears catch something softer than the wind. A voice, thin, shaky, almost cracking, but still holding on to a tune. It's a street singer, standing on the corner of a frosted alley, coat torn at the cuffs, fingers blue at the tips. He shakes his head to loosen the ice in his hair and keeps singing anyway. Because a song might earn him a penny, and a penny might mean bread. The melody wavers as his teeth chatter, but a few children stop to listen, their laughter mixing with the sound of boots crunching snow. A woman hurries past, tossing a copper coin almost without looking, as if generosity could be done in the blink of an eye. For the poor, entertainment isn't something planned. It's what happens when someone risks frostbite for a handful of coins. Now shift your gaze just a few streets away. The world turns upside down. Gas lamps glow golden outside a theatre, the kind with velvet curtains and polished brass handles. A carriage pulls up, the horse steaming in the cold, and out steps a couple dressed in furs that look warmer than entire cottages. The door swings open, and suddenly you feel it. A rush of heat, laughter, perfume. Inside, the music isn't shaky or desperate. It's a full orchestra, bows sliding confidently across strings, horns announcing every flourish as if the world outside simply doesn't exist. The audience settles into cushioned seats while servants collect coats, and for a few hours, winter is banished. You can almost hear the contrast in your bones. Out there, a voice cracking with cold. In here, violins weaving silk through the air. Both are called music, but only one is rewarded with applause, wine, and safe passage home in a carriage. You wonder if the wealthy even notice how sharp the line is. Some do, some don't. One gentleman adjusts his cravat and sighs, saying he nearly froze walking from the carriage to the door. You smile to yourself, quietly sarcastic, yes. What a tragedy, to endure a whole 15 seconds of exposure. Surely the suffering deserves a medal. At winter balls, the divide grows even clearer. Chandeliers spill golden light over polished floors. Couples swirl in waltzers' skirts, brushing like waves against the shore. The air smells of mulled wine, spiced oranges, and beeswax candles, a thick comfort layered upon comfort. You stand at the edge of the dance floor, watching the rhythm of spinning gowns and polished shoes. There's something hypnotic about it, this refusal to acknowledge the season pressing at the windows. Beyond the walls, the river has frozen. Bread is scarce. Children cough in alleys. Yet here, the greatest complaint you hear is that the punch is a little too tart. If irony could be bottled, you'd have a year's supply right now. There's a lesser-known detail about these winter gatherings, one you might not expect. Beneath the laughter and the music, the balls weren't always just about dancing. Many were carefully staged opportunities for political maneuvering, for arranging marriages, for whispering alliances over candlelit tables. In some cases, the ball mattered less as a celebration and more as a kind of marketplace where influence was bought and sold as easily as wine. Even now, scholars argue about the balance. Were these nights truly about joy, or were they just velvet-covered negotiations? The truth probably lived somewhere between the waltz steps and the whispers behind the curtains. You return in your mind to the singer outside. He has finished his song, the last notes scattering into the icy dark. No applause, no encore. He tucks his instrument away and rubs his hands together, chasing warmth that isn't there. The street quiets, except for the howl of wind between chimney stacks. Meanwhile, across town, the orchestra swells to its finale. The dancers bow, and the crowd claps as if nothing could be more important. Both sounds belong to the same city, the same night, yet they never meet. You breathe again, slowly. The air you draw in tastes like frost and candle smoke. Two worlds, one scraping for pennies, one drowning in chandeliers, coexist on the same cobblestones. You let the contrast settle around you, like snow that refuses to melt, and feel the long night press forward. You let your breath out slowly. The music from the ballroom still echoes faintly, violins melting into the night air. But once you turn the corner, the glitter fades. The street grows darker, colder, and the sound is not a waltz, but the shuffle of tired boots. A line has formed, stretching along the wall of a workhouse. Men and women clutching tin bowls and waiting for something that hardly deserves to be called a meal. Steam rises from a great pot, not because it's hearty, but because thin soup still produces steam. It smells of cabbage boiled into exhaustion, with the faintest suggestion that meat may have visited once, like a ghost passing through. The poor stand patient, shoulders hunched, breath mingling like smoke in the air. A child pulls on his mother's skirt, asking when the soup will come. She hushes him softly, though her own stomach growls loud enough to join the chorus. You notice how everyone watches the ladle, each dip, each scrape, each tilt, as if salvation might suddenly appear at the bottom. But salvation doesn't come in watery ladles. Salvation, if it comes, is usually wrapped in theatre, because a few streets away, in a much warmer hall, the wealthy stage their own kind of performance. Blankets are piled dramatically near the altar of a church, or in the center of a guild hall, and the benefactors smile proudly as they donate. The blankets are displayed like trophies, neatly folded, stacked high, tied with ribbons that shine in candlelight. One gentleman clears his throat to remind everyone how much his family has given this year. Another woman dabs her eyes with a lace handkerchief, moved, she claims, by the plight of the poor. Though her jewelry weighs more than the entire stack of blankets, you almost laugh, though softly, so as not to break the spell, because the real audience isn't the poor there outside, waiting in the cold. The audience is the donors themselves, clapping for one another, congratulating themselves on being merciful while sipping hot punch. You can almost imagine them giving awards for most decorative act of generosity. A red ribbon, perhaps, pinned just above the fur collar. There's an irony here that warms no one but is sharp enough to cut. The poor line up outside in the snow, bowls ready, while the rich line up indoors to congratulate each other. Both stand in lines. Both wait. But only one line ends with actual food, however watery, and only one line ends with applause. Which do you think brings more comfort? You breathe in, and you know the answer isn't simple. Hunger fills the belly with pain, but vanity fills the air with perfume. Both, in their own ways, are intoxicating. Here's a detail you might not know. Many of those charity events were carefully scheduled during the winter, not just out of kindness, but because they were convenient showcases. Winter was the season when the poor were most visible, when ragged coats and blue fingers couldn't be ignored. So the wealthy chose then to parade their generosity, ensuring the contrast was sharp enough for everyone to notice. Some scholars argue that these moments of benevolence did help, if only a little, while others insist the spectacle outweighed the substance. Either way, you can almost hear the whisper of hypocrisy in every ribbon tied neatly around a blanket that may never reach the people who need it most. You picture the soup line again. A boy receives his portion, a shallow ladle, into a dented bowl. He stares at it, then glances up at the steam clouds drifting away too quickly. He begins to slurp before his fingers even adjust around the metal. For him, charity isn't measured in speeches or ribbons. It's measured in mouthfuls. 2 or 3, if he's lucky. Now let your mind drift, just a little, into your own time. Today, we talk about charitable donations with hashtags and press photos. There are galas where the wine is older than most of the staff, and the checks handed over in oversized cardboard cutouts could probably build an entire wing of a hospital lift. They weren't mostly symbolic. You chuckle softly because it seems the performance hasn't ended. The costumes have changed, the hashtags replaced the ribbons, but the stage is much the same. Meanwhile, back in the Victorian cold, you notice how quickly warmth disappears. The blankets donated for show are too few, the soup too thin, and the applause too loud. A man at the end of the line is turned away when the pot scrapes empty. He shrugs, not in anger, but in the weary way of someone used to disappointment. You can almost feel his sigh against the night air, heavy as the frost settling on the cobblestones, and still, the wealthy walk home from their charity banquets with cheeks pink from wine, congratulating themselves for the noble act of giving. One woman even jokes about catching a chill as she steps into her carriage, the furs around her neck thick enough to smother an ox. You can't help but smile at the absurdity. Here is a woman, worried about a sniffle, while a man outside hopes frostbite spares at least one of his toes. Comedy and tragedy share the same street, never speaking to each other, you draw in another long breath. The city is quiet, except for the occasional rattle of wheels, the crunch of boots, and the cough of someone whose lungs can't take much more. Generosity hangs in the air like smoke, visible but impossible to hold. You let it settle around you, this strange mixture of kindness and performance, of true need and theatrical giving, and then silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a city exhausted by its own contradictions. The night stretches on, longer than you expect, waiting for something warmer, something brighter. The line of the poor still stands, though the soup is gone. The line of the rich still claps, though the blankets are only props, and you stand in between, listening, breathing, watching the long night fall deeper. The night grows longer still. You tilt your head back, and for a moment, the sky above London feels like a lid pressed down upon the city. Smoke from 1,000 chimneys hangs thick in the air, blending with fog until even the moon looks weary. The streets are quieter now, though not entirely silent. Somewhere a cartwheel creaks. Somewhere a cough rattles. And everywhere, the cold presses itself against stone and skin with equal cruelty. You notice how both poor and rich inhabit this night, though not in the same way. For the poor, the long winter night is something to endure. Blankets are pulled tighter, fires coaxed from reluctant embers, bodies pressed together like puzzle pieces in narrow beds. Sleep comes, if it does, in bursts between shivers. Dreams are not gentle, they are hungry, filled with visions of bread and warmth that vanish when morning arrives. For the rich, the night stretches too, but differently. Behind velvet curtains, the crackle of coal fires fills drawing rooms. Candles gutter softly, their flames mirrored in polished silver. A gentleman yawns at his chair, bored by the endless hours, while a lady flips the pages of a novel with a sigh. The problem isn't survival, but monotony. How many times can you play cards before even winning feels dull? How many cups of chocolate before it loses its sweetness? You almost want to whisper in their ears. Try sleeping 3 nights with frost creeping up your boots. Boredom won't be your complaint anymore. Still, the night unites them, if only in patience. Both the wealthy and the poor mark time by the same clock, listening for the faint promise of spring. One waits with a restless yawn, the other with clenched teeth, but both wait. You sense it as you walk, drifting through alleys and boulevards. The city breathing unevenly under the same blanket of cold. There's something haunting here. Winter nights in London seemed endless, not because they truly were, but because every hour stretched into a test, and people, no matter their station, had to answer that test differently. Some answered with furs, others with silence. Some with tea, others with thin soup. Historians argue whether those nights shaped the toughness of the poor or dulled the sensitivity of the rich. You simply feel the weight of it, how the city groaned beneath the season. Year after year, now you let yourself imagine the sounds as midnight deepens. The river groans with ice, tugboats silent and stuck, roofs creak under frost. In a cellar, a child stirs, pulling the corner of a rough blanket over her head. In a mansion, a servant tiptoes to add coal to the fire without waking the master. The contrasts are sharp, but they all fold into the same night, and you are drifting too. Your breath grows slower, your shoulders softer. The images blur just a little. The cold of those long nights no longer bites at you. It only lingers as memory. It's strange, isn't it? How suffering, once past, can soften into a story. something you can hold gently instead of fear. You think of the workhouse lines, the velvet banquets, the cracked lips of children, the yawns of the wealthy, and you realize they all dissolve into the same fog at dawn. Winter does not last forever. It feels eternal in the moment, yes, but seasons change. Even in Victorian London, beneath layers of soot and sorrow, the snow melted eventually, and the first shoots of green pushed up through the grime. Spring didn't care whether you were rich or poor. It arrived anyway, so now, in the quiet of your own room, you can breathe a little deeper. The story winds down like a candle burning low. Let your body settle. Let the weight of blankets, your own blankets, soft and modern, perhaps smelling faintly of detergent instead of smoke, remind you that you're safe. No soup lines, no frostbite, just warmth, just rest. And if you listen carefully, you might still hear echoes of that long winter night, centuries away. The footsteps in the snow, the laughter behind carriage doors, the sigh of someone who simply wanted the season to pass. They all drift towards silence now, joining the hush that wraps around you. Slowly, gently, your own night stretches on. You don't need to wait for spring, you just need to close your eyes. The city fades, the fires fade, the coughs and the waltzes, the velvet and the rags, they all dissolve into a single hum, soft as the fan in your room or the wind against your window. And in that hum, you can rest. You can let go. You can let the long night carry you, not with hardship, but with comfort. Not with hunger, but with peace. The cold streets of London recede. The faces blur, the sounds soften, and you are left only with the rhythm of your own breath. In, out, and with each breath, the story fades a little more, like frost melting under the first rays of morning light. So let your eyes close now. Let the long winter night settle into stillness. You've heard enough. You've felt enough. The world outside can wait until tomorrow. For now, just drift into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.